Hi everyone, I'm Scott Schneider. This is Stereo Niche. Hey, this week we're going to talk about Vintage Audio 101. How to buy, how to sell, how to not get scammed. Stick around. All right, so this week it is Vintage Audio 101. And for me, that just means giving you an overview of how do you buy stuff, how do you sell stuff, how do you do research, and how do you not get scammed. So we're going to cover each of those categories in depth. And some of these I've talked a little bit before, but I thought I would sort of put that together in an overall video. So we're going to kick it off with research because I think that's the most important thing. There's a lot of information out there available to you, and if you know where to find it and know what to look for, I think you can answer most of your questions and get a lot of education without having to ask anyone. So we're going to cover that first and go through some of the sites that I frequent quite a bit, ones that I've been members of for a very long time, and then how to use those sites and you know what to do and what not to do. All right, so one of the things I think is most important is to learn how to find the information yourself. There is a ton of information out there, and if you know where to look and you know some basics on how to look, then I think you can get, these days, you can get most or answers to most questions without ever having to ask anyone. You just need to know where to look. So I'm going to show you a few sites that I have frequented over the years and gotten invaluable information. Almost all questions, for the most part, have been asked at this point, and you're not going to be the first one to ask such a question. So we're going to walk through that. If you're not familiar with forums, there's a few things that I want you to understand about a forum if you've never frequented one and know what to do. So there's a few rules of engagement that I've sort of outlined, and I wanted to walk through those before we talk about what sites, to go look for. Very first rule number one, be respectful. It's the very most basic thing. And it sounds easy, but unfortunately there are so many people that just come on there and they're rude right out of the gate. So be respectful for the people's time that you're trying to get, assuming that you're asking a question, of course. So if you're on there and you've keyed in and created what we call a thread, and that's something where you're engaging with the community and you want to engage with them. Now, most of the time, a new person wants to know something, so they ask a question. And to be honest with you, most people that are on the forums, they don't want to see that as your first post. What they really want to see is that you're participating with the community. So that's where it kind of starts. So showing respect is the first step in getting support from that community. Now, the next thing that's most important is every forum has a button up there in there somewhere, and it's called search. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but at this stage of the game, many of these forums have been around for a long time, and tens of thousands, if not millions, of posts have been made. At this stage of the game, there's probably an answer in there already for the question that you want to ask. So if you go to that search bar and you put in what you're looking for, you will probably get quite a few hits and a description in there somewhere. Now you have to do a little reading. Forums are not set up to be just perfect. They're just folks looking for answers, sharing information as they find it. But over years and years and years, somewhere in there is probably the answer to the question that you want to ask. So that would be the first step, is if you want information, go there and do the search, and you will most likely find it. It may take you a few pages to find it. You can, fine-tune your search criteria, but I would guess 9 times out of 10, you're going to find the answer that's already there from someone either last year or 10 years ago or even 15 years ago. Someone's probably asked a similar question. So you can start there, and then if you don't get an answer, you can certainly create what's called a thread. You create a thread as a discussion topic, and then other people will chime in and try to answer your question. Now, when you create that thread, by the way, the one thing that goes back to number one as far as respect is don't expect that it's going to be answered immediately. Forums are not businesses. They're not paying someone to be there at a drop of a hat and answer a question. It's an open platform for enthusiasts, and they're there for the fun of it. And there's a lot of those people who I would say are professional forum people who love that environment and are there and ready to answer questions, but it may take a little time. No one is there. Most people are not there every single day, all day long. So just be patient. Post your thread, ask your question, and then wait. But don't wait and not come back. If you're going to ask a question and it gets answered, let everyone know, that you appreciate the responses, or you have a follow-up question, and that goes a long way to getting additional support. The next thing is, if you really want to be appreciated in that community, is to contribute. Contribute something. And that doesn't have to be much. If you're new to vintage audio, it can simply be, how did you acquire your audio gear? Or, a story about it was in the family and it came into your hands, in this method. People love to hear stories. So that's contributing. If you have pictures, that's even better. There's nothing that forum folks love more than to see pictures and see something. And by doing that, you are contributing. You're there because most likely you have questions. So they don't expect you to have sort of technical information, but they would at least like you to share something about what it is, you're seeking information about. So doing that goes a long way to getting the community to support you and help you in whatever it is you're trying to find. And I'll go back to the last item to sum it up, and that's just be respectful. It's very important. Everyone in these communities is there to help and talk audio and do all these things that makes it fun for them. And if you show a little respect, it certainly goes a long way. Well, let's talk about one of the sites that is very important and very key if you are looking for information. Now, this one is called Classic Speaker Pages, and it's been around for a very long time. It's not the largest forum out there, but it's a very specific forum to many of the classic speaker companies that have been around, particularly AR, in particular, KLH, Advent, Allison, lots and lots of Dahlquist. Just about any of the major classic speaker companies are listed there, and there's a ton of information. If you want to know how to restore some early AR speakers, that would be the place to go. They have a whole guideline there. You can download it and then follow that. It was written by people who actually designed those speakers. So there's excellent information there. So if you're looking for speaker-specific information, I would bookmark that in your browser and make sure that's at least one of the places you go to if you have any questions about classic speakers. And there are individual sections there by manufacturer. So if you want to find something specific to say a Dahlquist DQ10, then that would be a great place to go. And again, as I mentioned before, use the search function. Do some searching. You may get your answer right away. If you don't find it, post a question and someone will eventually come along and hopefully guide you in the right direction. So that's one of the ones that I use very frequently. It's been around a very long time. Some excellent resources there as far as contributors. So if you don't know that website, I would bookmark it now and get an account going and get yourself familiar with it. The next site I would recommend is audioheritage.org. Now this site's also been around for a very long time. It is pretty much everything JBL. If you would like to know any of the history of JBL, about the Hartsfield, the Paragon, any of the early vintage JBL speakers, this would be the place to go. There's a ton of information there already. You can do a lot of research and you can dive into just about any of the the early JBL models. It's a website and forum, so you can look through the documentation that's there and then go into the forum section, and then you can also get an account created, do some search within the forum. If you don't find an answer, you can certainly ask any questions. But if you are at all interested in finding information about JBL, that's where I would start if you want to get going with probably the most in-depth information available. Now, I've talked about 2 speaker websites, but there are some other websites out there that do other things. And one of those is tapeheads.net. Now, if you have any question or if you want anything answered about tape decks or reel-to-reels, anything tape related, this is the place to go. It is filled with people who are extremely knowledgeable, can answer just about any question about any tape deck out there, especially the more popular ones. If you've got a question about a Nakamichi, that's going to be the place to go. And really anything tape related. It's why it's named Tapeheads after all. But it's a forum, and like I mentioned before, you'll need to create an account. While you're getting your account created, you can do plenty of research, and you can search through the forums and maybe get an answer to something you're looking for. Again, if you need to ask a question, be respectful. Show that you've done some research. That would always be beneficial to everyone, wanting to help you. They certainly would like to know that you've poked around a bit, and try to get an answer. So show that, you become a little bit knowledgeable, and people will jump head over heels to try and help you. They're just the kind of communities that are out there. So another one to bookmark, tapeheads.net, if you have any questions about any tape sort of gear. Now, lastly, the one I would recommend for overall just about anything is audiokarma.org. Now, I've been a member out there for a very long time, but it's a place that has just about every category covered in an overall perspective. So there are sections for individual manufacturers. There are sections for more generic, such as solid state or tube or tape gear. So they break it out into sections as well. There's speakers. So if you have an overall question about something that's a little more general in aspect, or if you just want to go to one place, you can certainly start there, and you'll get an answer of just about any category. So they've got a Macintosh forum section. They've got Dynaco. They've got JBL. They have all of those manufacturers in addition to the general ones for speakers and amps and things like that. So a great place to go. Huge community. It's tons of information. Again, follow the guidelines, be respectful. Plenty of research can be done there because, again, just about any question you may have has probably already been asked. And if you do a little bit of research, you'll probably find several threads on that subject and most likely get your answer. But again, if you don't, feel free to ask a question. Now, again, I'll emphasize here that, because I've seen it so many times, oftentimes what people want to come there for is to get an answer of how much is my gear worth. It's probably the most asked question on that forum. And I myself have answered that question hundreds of times probably, but in reality, you can do that yourself, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But on the websites, on the forums, you're better off to contribute something first, and whether that's tell at least the story of how you got the gear and how you acquired it. And that can be as simple as, I went to a garage sale and there it was, and it was on sale and I bought it right away. Or it could be it was left in the family and my uncle passed and he was a passionate audiophile. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about audio, but I'd love to know more. If you start there, people will certainly help. What they don't want to see is that you create an account and the same day you got it, your first question and only question was, what's it worth? The truth of the matter is, again, you can find that information yourself these days. It's not that hard, but you're just asking people to do work for you. So that doesn't come across, so well. So I would recommend doing some research and then asking some general questions first, and then at some point you can get into that, valuation side of things. But it's a great website. Tons of people out there in every, aspect of vintage audio, from cassette decks to turntables. You name it, it's out there. So if you're looking for one place to go, that would be a place that you certainly want to bookmark. And again, there's, every area is out there and is covered, so you'll be have access to, some people that are not very knowledgeable in anything that you may want to ask. So those are the websites and the forums that I would recommend. There are a lot more. You can certainly do, some searching and find some other locations and other sites that are very beneficial. These are just some that I would recommend right off the top of my head. All right, we're going to switch gears here a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to buy gear and some of the things to look for. Now, I've talked about this before, but I think it's worth repeating, and we're going to go through a bit of a outlined process here about how to buy. First thing, you know that I've recommended if you watch the channel, then my recommendation is always to buy local. And that means, you can find it online on a national site, on a national offering like eBay. And if you find it there, you can certainly find it being sold locally. Now, obviously that limits your ability, but I would never suggest having something shipped. So I would recommend if you do a search on eBay and use the tool there that says what's your location and then how many miles away from your location, and you can certainly find things. Now, obviously that's going to be much more beneficial for folks in highly densely populated areas, but you have the peace of mind that if something something won't happen during shipping, you can go pick it up yourself. Now, be aware that some people, very few, may not want local pickup, and that's why they put it on eBay. But I would certainly start there: Craigslist, Facebook, and your local retailer, your local audio shop that is selling gear. There's a few around. Sometimes they're not as common, but certainly frequent your brick and mortar store if there's one local to you, and then go there. And also tell them if you have something specific that you're looking for, let them know. I think many times they'll put you on a list. They may not have it in stock right then, but they may get it, who knows, the next day or the next week, and they'll give you a call. So if something like that is, very specific to you, then that would be the way to go. So number one is buying local, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. I would use them. Just know that it can be frustrating. If you're buying something off of Facebook or Craigslist, having been someone who's sold there for a long time, I'll give you some advice. Never just send them a note and say, is it available? If it's online, assume it's available. Ask a question about it. If you want to get the seller's attention, ask them a question of something. Are there any issues with it? Anything but, is it available? Now, I know that's an automatic response that's on Facebook, and you can hit it and it's very convenient. But you know what? You don't have to hit the button. You can actually add to that comment and say, hey, I saw it's available for a while. Just check confirming that you still have it. You don't have to reply just what is suggested. Put something else in there and make it different. The reason I say that is because sometimes it feels like a scammer, and we're going to get to that later, but you feel like, somebody was just too lazy to ask questions and you're not going to be really that interested. So I would recommend posting a different question other than, is it available? So moving on, once you find out it's available, one of the first things you're going to want to ask and engage in, if the seller has not given you good information in the description, are the two things related to condition. And that the first thing you want to check out, and if you don't get good pictures, ask for them, because physical condition is the most important thing. Physical condition means not having any huge gashes in it, any huge scratches. That is going to be the most important thing because it's the hardest to fix. So if you have a receiver and it has a huge gash or a broken faceplate or whatever, you just have to get a new one most likely. So that's not something you can just buff out or fix, in most cases. Small things here and there you might be able to address, but for the most part, you're stuck with it. So condition is something that is very important. So you want to understand what is that condition, because that's going to dictate the price on the back end. So physical condition is something you need to understand and evaluate. The next thing is functional condition. Is everything working? Is there an issue with it? It is not always the lesser important thing. It does become very important if there are issues that you can't get fixed easily, but you need to understand those going in. So be very clear with the seller that you want to know, have they tested it? If they have, what issues are there? And if you sort of get a vague answer, I would be suspect because, if they haven't done anything with it, then, in that case, you almost have to assume that it doesn't work. You can't say, you can't accept the fact that they haven't tested it, but, their father said 20 years ago that it was working, when he put it away. You get that quite a bit too. When I put them in their box 20 years ago, it was working. Well, that's not working today. You can't confirm that. So that's the second area to be most critical of, and understand that as you're evaluating something that you're going to buy. Now, the next thing is, when you're doing your evaluation, is parts availability. Now, when I say that, I don't mean just new parts, but that is part of it. There's only one manufacturer that is still manufacturing parts you can buy, and that's pretty much Macintosh. So you can buy Macintosh parts for just about any Macintosh unit. There are some parts available for like Dynacos, and there are some parts available for other things like Marantz's in a way. There are some things specific, if there's a chronic issue like a power button, for example, there are some folks making replacement parts for them. But the one that's most common that you can get support is Macintosh. Lots of support for Dynaco. Outside of that, you're going to want to confirm that if there are any new parts available. After new parts, there are used parts. So you're getting, can you get a part from a piece that's been parted out? And that becomes more possible the more common is the unit. So the Pioneer SX780 is a very common unit. Lots of them were sold. So there are a lot of them out there being parted out. So therefore you can find parts fairly easily on a site like eBay. Or a parts unit. If you figure out that you might need a whole parts unit, you have a higher probability of being able to find one. So a calculation in your mind about getting it fixed and having the parts available is just a step that you want to go through when you're evaluating what to buy. Now, as far as availability is one thing, then the other side of the equation is what's just unobtainium. There are certain units that have some parts in them that just aren't made, and you just can't get replaced at all. If they're not working, they're not working. The Citation preamp that I demoed not long ago and did an overview of, there are some units in there, some modules that are unobtainium. There is no way to fix them that I'm aware of. You certainly can't find new old stock pieces. So if that unit ever was to break down, then it becomes a doorstop. It's an excellent unit now while it's working, but should something ever happen to it, there's nothing else that can be done other than finding another parts unit and getting those components out of there. But that's the only option, and it's a very rare unit. So the likelihood of doing that and finding that is pretty hard to do. So it's just something that you have to take into consideration and be aware of when you're going through that process. Next is repair technician. We've talked about it, quite a bit here and there. It's discussed quite a bit, but having a repair technician available to you is very important. Now, when we talk about having a tech available to you, most of the time we're talking about someone who is, I'll say, a general technician that can repair just about anything. And they're folks that have a ton of experience, but it's broad. That's important to have for just, any of your gear. But as I was mentioning earlier about understanding if there's any unobtainium parts, there are some units where sometimes somebody who is more of a general technician might not have the skills to fix something that's sort of unique. And some of that gear that comes to mind like that are some units from Carver, for example. Carver just had some different circuitries that are a bit complicated, and not every tech is very well versed in fixing them. So that's a case where you might need to find a specialist. There are companies that actually are set up to just service vintage Carver units. And in that case, that might be something that is good to know, because you can then send it to them and have that, that company service it for you. And they've done it many times, so they can do it with their eyes closed basically and know how to address any issue. So I couldn't think of the company name right off the top of my head, but there is a company that I'm going to utilize for that very reason. Nakamichi decks. There are certain Nakamichi decks that are extremely complex. Fix My Duel, for example. There's a company that only fixes duels, and you can send them your turntable, and they will basically redo the whole thing for you because that's all they do. There is, I think it's QRX Restore for Sensui, and they're experts in quad Sensui receivers. I think they're all the way on the West Coast, Oregon or Washington maybe, but they're there as well. So there's companies like that that specialize in some of those extremely complex units, or or just a manufacturer, a brand that they're very well versed in. So it's good to know that because in those cases, somebody that has done something hundreds of times can get it really back into spec, and it's probably the best thing for it. So just good to know those types of things and be aware of them. Next thing for when you're buying anything is to know, is it going to work for you? Seems easy, but I do know some folks who have were so excited to go buy that big monster receiver, let's say, and then find out that it didn't work with their 4-ohm speakers. And so you don't want to go do that and then find out afterwards that it's not going to work, or it's not the plan you had in mind anyway. So just important to make sure that you understand the specs of what you're buying ahead of time so that you're not disappointed. Now that can also mean just the size of the unit. A Pioneer SX 1980 is monstrous, and as your cabinet that you want to put it in, will it fit? So get the measurements ahead of time and then go measure your cabinet. Certain things like that, it's just good to know. Speakers, obviously, can it fit in the location that you want to put them? Maybe you'd love to have, a set of JBL Hartsfields, but you don't have the space for those things. And it's just good to know the size of something before you go buy it. A lot of speakers now are kind of narrow and tall and have a small footprint, and that's a lot more accommodating than something that's a larger footprint and 200 pounds, let's say. So those kind of things that you want to think ahead before you buy it. Most people do. I don't think it's that often that somebody hasn't already taken that into consideration, but it is something to have on your checkbox list and just check it off and say, okay, yeah, it's going to work. And so the last area is price. We're going to talk more about pricing itself, but as far as when you're buying, it's important to know what's the value of something and what does it cost to buy it online. What does it cost to buy it at a local vendor, a local retail store, and what's a local used sale pricing. And that's important because, and I'm going to go into more detail, but it's important to know that so that you don't overspend. And some people may not worry about that, but it's nice to know that what that price is and that value is, so that when you go to sell it one day, you'll know, are you going to be able to recoup your money or not? And most people, or many people, may not care, but it's just nice to know that you've thought about that ahead of time. So one thing I wanted to touch on too is buying locally. I emphasize that, but I wanted to talk through what do you need to prepare for when you go to buy local. Now the first thing to do before you go there is to ask them, can it be tested? If it's a set of speakers, do you have a system that you can connect it to so that you can test it out? Very important question. And that's for anything, a turntable, a receiver, just any item that you plan to buy. You just want to know, is it going to be, can they demo it when you get there? Now, if you are going to be able to demo it, then I would always suggest taking your own music, because if you know your music and know what it's supposed to sound like, then you're better equipped to know, is the gear playing correctly or not. The one thing about that is, remember to get your media and your music when you leave. That's kind of something that very common people will forget, or at least, or maybe take a CD that that you burned yourself and you don't care. But taking your own music is very important as well. Now, of course, you're testing it to make sure it plays, but if it's something more complex like a receiver or a preamp, or anything that has multiple functions is to test all those functions, or at least test the main functions. On a receiver, that means making sure the radio plays. Can you switch it into phono and you can play a turntable? All the main functions. You may not get to test out every single thing, but at least if the basic ones are playing, the amp is working, the speakers are playing, at least the basics are there, then you've got a comfort level. The other thing is, after that, refer to your research notes. You've done some research ahead of time, which we talked about earlier, and be prepared to know some things about it if you can. And that might mean, let's say that there is it's a Macintosh unit, and many Macintosh units have issues with the power switch. They can wear out. Maybe ask them, has it ever been replaced? Just some of that kind of information to know, because there seems, for most pieces, there's generally some kind of weakness, or very often there is some kind of weakness about that unit, and you'd like to be aware of that when you're there testing it out. Now, the seller may or may not know anything, but at least if you're prepared, you can look for that issue when you're there. And knowing that, also might be a good bargaining chip for you as well. If you detect any issue there, you can bring that up. Now, I was only talking in generalities for speakers and gear, but for speakers, the one thing that you can do is once they're set up and they're playing, the one technique that you want to use to make sure that all the drivers are working is to take the center core of a paper towel roll, take that center paper roll and take it with you. And what you want to do is you want to use that to put it over your ear and in front of each driver of the speaker. And that way it gives you a way to isolate it. Now, turn the volume down. You don't want to do that at high volume, but it gives you a way of isolating each driver to make sure that it's working. So one little inexpensive way of just doing a little bit of a speaker test. Now, once you've gone through that, in most cases you can take the grill off. So you would take the grill off and do a visual inspection of the drivers as well. And a lot of woofers need refoaming of the surrounds, and just about every case you can get that replaced. You can do it yourself even. Order the foams, do that. But it's good to know if that needs to be replaced, or have they been driving them with no foams for a long time. You would be shocked at how many people don't know that the grill cover can come off of speakers, or I say most speakers. And many times I'll pull the grills off and they actually never knew they could be taken off. And inside you see all the pieces of the foam. So be aware of that, something to look for. If the grills can't come off, which sometimes that's the case, you need to take a very high quality or high powered flashlight, or your phone may do it, but I would try to take a flashlight if you could. And because if it has a grill cloth over it, then most of the time you are able to, at an angle, flash that light in there and actually see through the cloth, and then get some idea of condition behind the cloth as well. So it's another technique that you can use to give it an inspection and just make sure that everything is looking okay, before you buy it. And in rare cases, the last thing that you could do, and this is mostly when you're going to buy just drivers. There are cases where there are some vintage drivers available. They're not in a cabinet. And in those cases, you can take your meter and you can hook it up and just make sure that they're not open and they're not blown. So it's just something else to think about. But you got to take your meter with you to be able to do that. So you need to, make sure you got it in your kit of your paper roll and all that as you're heading out the door. Well, okay, we've talked about how to do some research. We talked about how to buy. Let's talk a little bit about how to sell. So the very first thing that you need to do when you're going to sell is to figure out how to price it, because other than condition, which that's one thing in and of itself, the next thing is knowing how to price your item. And that's the most common issue I've seen for folks frustrated that they can't sell something. And the majority of the time it's because they've overpriced it. So when you're going to get your pricing, you're going to do that just like you would do for a home. If you're going to sell a home, you get what's called comparables. And that's comparable prices of homes that sold. Those are not asking prices. And that's the big differentiator first, is to make sure you're looking at sold values, not asking prices. So anyone can ask whatever they want. You can ask $5,000 for an item that might be worth 100, but you'll never sell it. But it's sitting there, of course. So you need to confirm what things sold for to know what the actual valuation is. The easiest place to go to look for that is eBay, of course. Now, eBay makes it very easy to do that if you're familiar with eBay. There is a sold or sold transactions, I think it's called. It's a little check mark, and you can do this on your phone or you can do it on your computer. You have to scroll down a little bit. And if on your phone, I think it's under the filters, and on your computer, it's sort of on the left column down on the left. And once you select sold, it will then filter out and show you all the transactions that actually sold and show you what those values are. Now, as you're looking at it, and let's say it's a fairly popular unit of something, and there are 20 items that sold. Now, it only shows you sold for, I think, 3 months back, and that's as far as it'll go. So you need to have, it has to be something that's fairly popular, of course, to be able to have some numbers out there. But so most time, all the units, if you have 20 units, they're not all in the same condition. So that's something that you need to match your similar condition item to what's sold on the on the transaction list. So you may find that out of a rare occasion, one is sold with the box in mint condition. Well, that's going to be near the top of valuation. If yours is no box and of average condition with some scratches, you can't price it the same as a mint one with box. So be realistic, compare it to the ones that are comparable. If your unit doesn't come on and there are other units there that are similar, saying as is, won't power on, that's your average price. So be realistic, know what that pricing is, and be aware of that. Now, after you've got your price and know what approximate value is from eBay, then you need to determine where do you want to sell it. So that means, do you want to sell it on eBay? eBay is fine, but be aware that, if you're going to sell on eBay, you have to decide, do you want to limit it to the local market, which you can do, or most of those sold prices that you saw, the highest ones were for somebody who shipped it. So if you want to go through that, you have to be willing to properly box it up if you don't have the original box, and then be willing to pack it up and then ship that to someone else. Don't underestimate how difficult it is to pack something that doesn't have the original packing material. So just be aware that it can be a challenge, especially if it's a heavy receiver, an amplifier, speakers. It gets challenging to package those things. Now, you can also take them to places like an eBay store and they will pack them. But, of course, that's going to add fees to it. And that's going to be harder for you to sell because the buyer is aware of that. You have to tell them that in advance, and they're aware of that. So those are factors into the total cost that you just need to calculate in to what your expectation is. If you see something that's sold with box, for $1,000, and you've got one that's really minty, but you need to package it, and that packaging is now going to cost you, $200 or $300. That person's not going to buy that from you. They're going to go with the other one that, has the material and they can actually get it shipped to them more safely. So just be aware of things like that. Now, if you decide to sell it locally, don't ask for an eBay price. That doesn't make any sense. And I've said it before, so I'm re-emphasizing it here. If you sell it on eBay, you are going to have selling fees, right? eBay is a national market, a global market. You're getting access to that market, so there's a fee for that. In addition, eBay provides a 90-day warranty to anything that is sold on their platform. So if you sell it and 30 days, 60 days, before 90 days, that buyer doesn't like it, they get to return it. It doesn't matter if you agree or not. eBay will take your money out of your account, give it back to the seller once it's returned to you. So be aware of that. And so because of that, they command higher prices. So you can't expect that you're going to be able to get that price selling it locally off of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. So that's another reason I see a lot of frustration is folks are aggravated that they can't get an eBay price without a warranty for selling it on Facebook Marketplace. So if you're going to sell it there, My rule of thumb is it's 30 to 50% of an online price. Now, don't forget, on eBay, if you sell it for $100 on eBay, the eBay fees are 15 to 20% that you don't get. It goes to eBay. So the most that you will get is $80. So that price you see of $100 is not what the seller gets. So you're not even getting close to that. If you're selling it locally, you need to be well under $80. So that's why it's 30 to 50. So you're not going to give a warranty and you're not going to get the full price you see on eBay. So therefore, you have to sell it less. And there's exceptions to that. If you happen to have an extremely valuable, very rare item, yeah, you can probably do pretty well. But I'm talking about, the average vintage item. If there's plenty of them on eBay, why would anybody want to buy it from you when they can get it from eBay and get a warranty? It just doesn't make any sense. So be aware of that and how you sell it and what platform you're selling it on. Lastly, on local sales, I do want to point out that it's also a pain. If you're using Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, invariably you're going to go through a lot of effort because a lot of people will tire kick. They'll say they're interested and then never call you again. And that just expect that. So I don't just pick up the first person always and say, hey, yeah, it's available, come on. I typically am a little picky about, and I wait until I get a little bit of interest, and then how they engage me, I determine who I want to reach out to. You can typically tell who's serious and who isn't. And so if you've got an item that has some interest or you expect some interest, then I wouldn't be too eager in responding to the first person. Might sound a little harsh, but your time being a seller is just as valuable. And I will tell you that a lot of people will jerk you around and waste your time, when they have no real interest in actually buying it. So be a little leery of that. Make sure that, you feel comfortable with that person. You obviously, it's the 2020s. And after COVID, people are still used to going and meeting somewhere and doing those sorts of things. It's harder to do that if you've got a large set of speakers, let's say. So if you're going to do that, then you're not going to be able to let that person test those speakers. And if you can't let that person test those speakers, you're not going to get a better price, right? So it's all related. So be aware of that. I happen to have a situation where no one's coming into my house, so it's a little unique for me. But you don't want people coming to your home. Then you might have a garage you can set it up in. If you don't have that, then you're forced to sort of sell it as is in that situation. So a lot of things to consider when you're selling online and locally. But some stuff to think about. Of course, always be safe. Always lean to the side of caution because you don't know what the other person is. But that's another reason why I stress, try to get a feel for them before you just give them your address or decide that that's the person you want to sell to. The last section I want to go into is don't get scammed. Just don't get scammed. I've never been scammed. The reason I've never been scammed is because I don't give my money to anybody unless I see the item and I have it in my hand and I've touched it and made sure that it works or whatever it is. But I don't give anybody my money until I see the goods. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen all the time. There are a lot of scammers out there, and there is a lot of phishing scams, all sorts of things. They're getting very sophisticated, but they can never scam you if you never send them money. So don't do it, no matter how sincere they seem. There are some fantastic people that are very good at it. I've talked to them. They have called and given me all these elaborate stories. And as soon as they mention, oh, I'll ship it to you, that's the red flag that always goes up. And, because I mentioned before, I only buy things in person and therefore no one can scam me. Just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, I reached out to someone selling something and they said, oh, where are you? And I said, well, I'm in North Carolina. Where, they were advertising. They said, oh, I'm in Virginia. Well, they didn't know that I can travel halfway across the country to go buy stuff if I want to. And so I turned around and I said, that's no problem. I'll meet you there. How much, when can I meet you? And of course, I never heard back from them again. So be aware of that. Now, there's some common themes to scammers, especially the ones that are on Facebook and on Craigslist. Um, Before we get to the obvious stuff, but there are some themes that they'll often relay. And if you see these, it should make your flag, some of your red flags go up. But typically there's a story of my father passed away, had a death in the family, and they were an audiophile, and they had all this audio gear, and I know nothing about it. And then there's a price associated with it that's, a bit too good to be true. You should automatically go scammer. In this case, they're a scammer first until proven otherwise. That's the way you should look at it. And there are some other things that they say. If they ever say, well, we've gotten a lot of interest and we're going to start taking deposits. Another red flag. You don't need to take deposits on something. You commit to it and you will then come there and see it and check it out and then pay them your money. There's no reason for a deposit, only unless they want to take your money and scam you. So do not ever send a deposit to someone. No matter how good it sounds, it's always too good to be true. If they start talking about shipping, you're buying it on a local selling website. Why do they need to talk? Now, unfortunately, I will say Facebook. Facebook has created a nightmare as far as I'm concerned. They are not set up to manage shipping at all. They're not eBay, and they're just, in my opinion, allowing folks to scam you by allowing this feature to show of shipping. Now, there's a lot of great people out there, and I have actually sold and shipped something years ago. Someone reached out to me that I was selling on Craigslist, and they were interested, and I was already selling on eBay as well, so it wasn't that big of an issue. But I was selling it on Craigslist because I didn't want to ship them, but I ended up doing that. So there are good people there. However, if you don't want to lose your money, I would assume they're not, just to be blunt about it. So if they start talking about shipping, you say no thanks. If you do that, you just, your money's going to stay in your pocket. The other thing that is somewhat common on Craigslist and on eBay even, and even Facebook, is they'll give you a different address to communicate through. So eBay in particular, if you see a picture or anything and they say, oh, send me an email outside of this, just know that there's a high chance that could be a scammer. A lot of times it just doesn't match up. Their name and their email address doesn't match their name. Those sorts of things should also be red flags. So it's another way of sort of pulling you outside. By the way, if you buy something outside of the eBay rules, you have no protection. The part of going through eBay ensures that you get the eBay protection as well. So if you're on a national selling site like an eBay, if you go through their process, you get protection and you don't lose anything, being your money. If a scammer if you were to buy something on eBay and they sent you a box with a brick in it, you'll be able to file a claim and get your money back. So that's the advantage. Even though you're paying more, it's the advantage of using the platform. So for local sales, again, back to scammers, look for those red flags of shipping. My relative passed away, boo hoo hoo. He was an audiophile, etc. Be aware of those things, and you won't lose your money. So I have a list of the do's and don'ts. The don'ts, what I mentioned before, don't send your money outside of a selling platform if there is one. If you're buying on a national site, do check their background. Do check their selling history. Look for a list of what items have they sold. If they have primarily sold and have a history of selling, let's say, children's clothes, and all of a sudden they're selling high-end audio gear, that's a hacked account. There's something should go off and say, wow, that's not normal. That's why you need to do a little bit of a background check and do a little research. If it's too good to be true, there's probably some other things there that'll tell you that that's a fact. And hacked accounts happen all the time. And what they typically will do is put some fake items on there. And even though eBay will reimburse you, you won't lose your money, they will still benefit. They'll still get something out of it. So just be aware it's a hassle that you don't want to go through. Some other things when you're to avoid is don't be in a hurry. There's always a sense of urgency for scammers because they want to get the money and run. So if you feel that you're being pressured, and also if it's one of these situations where you feel like if you don't hurry up and get it, you're going to lose out, that's when you get scammed. If you feel like, oh man, that $5,000 Marantz receiver, he only wants $1,000 for it. If I don't hurry, I'll miss it. Well, you're going to hurry and you're going to lose your $1,000. So, it is the old saying, too good to be true, is very true when it comes to this situation. So be aware that if it's too good to be true, it most likely is. Another thing to do and be aware of when you're evaluating is it a scam or not, is check out the pictures. The pictures tell a big story. Always look to see, are the pictures consistent? Most of the time, scammers have gotten their pictures off of the internet. So there is a way you can take a picture and you can put it into Google and what's it called? Google Images, I think. And Google will search the image and see if there's a match out there. It's not perfect. It's a little bit actually kind of hard to do. It doesn't work very well. But you can go search yourself, and if it's a rare unit like a Marantz 2600, there aren't that many pictures out there. If you're going to find, even a scammer is going to ask $2,000 or $3,000 for that, go look. And most likely, in a lot of cases, you're going to find that picture that it's sitting on, that table, that whatever couch that they put it on, or the windows behind it. You're going to see something in there that identifies it as that picture. The other thing, not just that, but look at if they have 6 pictures and none of those 6 pictures show it in the same setting, it's a scam. No one's going to take that heavy receiver and go move it into a different house in a different room and take a different picture of it. It doesn't work that way. You're going to barely spin it around and take it on the same table. So look for consistency in each picture to just, get some confirmation that it's the same person. So those are some other things to look for when you're trying to figure out, is this a scam or isn't it? Well, all right. It's been a long video. I've done a lot of talking this go round. It was a lot of material to cover. It's a topic or a video I've been wanting to put together for a while. I know for many of you it's a bit redundant. You're very experienced in doing these things and finding information. But for someone just getting into it, it's one video you can watch and I think you can gain quite a bit. How to do research. Some of those sites, again, are very beneficial. Seek them out, go find them, bookmark them for future reference. Remember those rules of engagement. You'll get very far ahead if you want to engage the community there. How to buy. There's some tools of the trade or some things to think about when you're doing that. So think about those things when you're trying to find some gear. Selling goes hand in hand with pricing. So think about those pricing methods. Go through, find some comparables if you can. It gets much more challenging if you have a very rare item and they don't change hands very often. So it doesn't work so well, or I'll say it's a much more challenging situation if you have a very rare item. But for the most part, the majority of gear, there are some examples out there. eBay by far is the best place to go, but there are other sites. And sometimes you have to do a little more digging to find those comparables. And you may need to be patient as well. If it's a more rare item, it may take some time to see one come up for sale and document the actual sold value. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone who has sold something and ask them. If it doesn't record it, then someone sold something, feel free to reach out. They may say no, they don't want to share it, but they might say yes. So it gives you some opportunity to document what things have sold for. How not to get scammed. A lot of us have been around the block a few times and have seen those guys in action. And hopefully you found that beneficial and maybe saves you from getting scammed as well. So stay diligent. They are always, looking for their next mark, and you don't want to be that guy or that woman to, fall for their, little methods, if you will. So I hope you found the video beneficial. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up. You don't want to miss that next video. Hit subscribe. And of course, thank you guys so much for tuning in.